What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here, going wide receiver tier rankings for Week 15 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new, and let's dive right into it. And as always, we'll start with our S tier. We have 5 guys that made the cut this week, but just know there are so many wide receivers that have S tier upside every single week. So if you're in the A tier, even the upper end of the B tier, you have the S tier potential week in, week out. But there's one thing that all these guys in the S tier have in common: they're elite talents, they're in good offenses, the quarterbacks are decent enough, some good, some okay. Look at you, Jared Goff. And two, I don't think you're innocent either. But all these guys do support pretty much a 30% target share and are just absolutely talents, like I said. So number one for me is not Tyreek Hill this week, and the reason being that he got injured in that Tennessee game. So he's a big gimpy, was kind of in and out in the second half, so was kind of surprised he even came back. And it's a really tough matchup versus the New York Jets. Now, I'm not one to really care about matchups whatsoever with Tyreek Hill. He is just too fast for him to be stopped by anybody. He just had right around 30 fantasy points versus this team not too long ago, so it's not the concern. It's basically just the injury here. But I know CeeDee Lamb's 100% healthy, so I'm going to give him the number one spot this week. 9 targets per game, close to 10, 28% target share, and he has been on fire this season. 50.5 over-under in this game on the road in Buffalo, 24-point implied team total, 2.5 point spread as well. No reason not to like him. Dak Prescott has been playing like an MVP this year, so the good times should keep rolling. Already mentioned Tyreek Hill. A.J. Brown, been a bit of a skid for the Philadelphia Eagles recently, but this should be a good matchup versus Seattle. 25.5 implied team total, 47.5 point over-under, 3.5 point spread on Monday Night Football on the road in Seattle. And they're currently allowing the 5th most points per game to wide receiver position. He's getting 10 targets per game, close to a 32% target share, a 44.5% market share of the team's air yards. Dude's an alpha dog out there. He's always going to have touchdown upside and big play potential. Stephon Diggs. He has not had the greatest stretch of games over the past couple of months now, but he's still getting plenty of targets. 11 targets last week, only 6 fantasy points, but 10 targets per game, close to a 30% target share. Josh Allen, we know he's going to chuck the ball. This should be a very high-scoring game. Not a great matchup versus Dallas, but I always take elite talent, elite game environment, and a good quarterback any day over a matchup. Amon-Ra St. Brown also going to make the cut here. Pretty down week last weekend versus the Chicago Bears, but should bounce back, hopefully, with Detroit back at home in the Dome where they play their best football. He's averaging close to 10 targets per game, over 7 catches, 29% target share, and 90 yards per game. He's certainly Jared Goff's number one option week in and week out of the slot. And moving on to the A tier, like I said, all these guys have S tier upside, but have to have a tier break at some point. We're going to lead it off with Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. I was not that high on him heading into the season with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. I just didn't like the mobile quarterback where they run the ball more, less targets. And obviously the accuracy was a bit of a question mark. But with Gardner Minshew stepping in, they have definitely gelled quite nicely, especially recently. He's been a model of consistency. And on the season, he's actually averaging more targets per game than a guy like Stephon Diggs. 32% target share, a 72% weight opportunity share, and over 7 catches per game. Pittsburgh matchup, pretty much middle of the road, but with them being at home, I don't really have any concerns here. He should once again put up another strong showing. We have the San Francisco duo of Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. This offense is humming in all cylinders, whether it's the run game or the passing game. They all seem to get work. 30.5 implied team total, which is the highest of the week. Deebo has been on absolute fire in recent weeks, and Brandon Ayuk is still getting his, so there's enough room to go around for everybody in this offense this weekend, so they're all going to be ranked quite highly, but no reason to be off the Deebo or Ayuk train. If you have them on your team, you are starting them for what versus Arizona. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, we have another duo here, but they're going to also make the A tier because they get a dream matchup versus the Washington Commanders. 28-point implied team total for the Rams this weekend, which is the second highest, only behind the San Francisco 49ers. So this is a dream spot as they're allowing the second most points per game to the position, nearly 200 receiving yards and over 1.5 receiving touchdowns. We have seen time and time again where both these guys can produce good fantasy showings in the same game. We saw it last week. We saw Puka Nacua have a monster game versus the Cleveland Browns as well. So fire them both up as wide receiver ones this weekend. And moving on to our B tier, we have Jamar Chase leading us off of the Cincinnati Bengals. Monster week versus the Jaguars with Jake Browning, and then the second week versus the Indianapolis Colts. Not really so much. Now, keep in mind, it wasn't the greatest game script in the world because they did get a decent lead on the Indianapolis Colts. So I'm willing to give them a bit of a pass here, but it was obviously a pretty disappointing performance overall. Matchup versus Minnesota, it's pretty good as a wide receiver. The defense has actually been sneaky good so far this season. I was looking at the PFF coverage rankings, and they're actually, I believe, 4th on the season. So I wouldn't say it's a dream matchup, but they are currently 22nd fantasy points-wise versus wide receivers. So assuming we can get a nice bounce back performance out of him, I don't think this game gets out of hand. It's only a 3.5 point spread. They're playing at home. So I still think Chase is a very valuable fantasy asset this weekend. Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. Zach Wilson ended up having a career day versus the Houston Texans in what was projected to be a pretty poor weather game, but overall it was an excellent performance out of him. And then Garrett Wilson obviously ended up having a good game as well on the season. The volume has not been an issue. Nearly 10 targets per game on a 31% target share, a 47% market share of the team's air yards, and a near 79% weight opportunity share, which is all elite numbers. The problem is quarterback play is going to hinder him, but this is another good spot versus Miami. They're currently 19th versus wide receivers. Now, the implied team total is low at 14.5. That is nothing new, but the game script should be good. 8.5-point spread in the Dolphins' favor, so they should be trailing, should be throwing the ball quite often. And if Garrett Wilson's going to get us right around 10 targets, if not more, then he should be productive for fantasy purposes because we know he's an elite talent. Mike Evans, horrible day last week. Hopefully he got that out of his system. Only one catch, one fantasy point, I believe 1.8 over in PPR leagues. Not a great matchup versus Green Bay. They're allowing the 8th fewest points per game in position, but he's averaging 8 targets per game. He's always a touchdown scoring machine. He's got a 15.2 and over 1,500 air yards this season with a 43% market share of the team's air yards. Baker Mayfield loves the guy. He's his number one option. So he's certainly a borderline wide receiver one this weekend. And Jalen Waddle's a guy that I actually like quite a bit this weekend. So in their first outing versus the Jets, he had 8 targets, 8 catches, 114 yards, his second best fantasy day of the season. It's a really tough matchup overall if you look at it on paper versus the Jets. They're only allowing 23.1 points per game, which is the fewest in the league. And yardage-wise, only 100 yards per game as well, and 0.23 receiving touchdowns. Now, I kind of hope Tyreek plays for Jalen Waddle's sake because it's going to keep the attention off of him, and then he's going to get some softer coverage because we know Sauce Gardner's out there. He's a shutdown corner now. You can't ever shut down Tyreek Hill. If he happens to miss, Waddle's certainly going to get more volume, more secured volume. Wouldn't surprise me if he saw double-digit targets. But again, he's probably going to get the tougher matchup, so the efficiency of those targets might go down. So either way, I think Waddle's a fine play this weekend. I'm hoping Tyreek Hill kind of plays, though, so we get that softer coverage. DK Metcalf, quarterback situation's a bit up in the air. If it's Geno Smith, I love DK Metcalf here versus Philly. They're allowing the most points per game position so far, and we know DK Metcalf has been hot the past couple of weeks. Even if it is Drew Lock, I still think he's fine because this is the best matchup you can ask for, but it's definitely a bit of a downgrade. I'd probably have him. I'm not sure if I'd change the ranking too much. He still scored versus the 49ers with Drew Lock at quarterback, but I think I'd definitely have to lower him a little bit more. Then DJ Moore, a really tough matchup this week versus the Cleveland Browns. They're allowing the second fewest points per game in the position, but he's one of the safest wide receivers, it seems like, week in, week out at this point. 20 near 30% target share, 76% weight opportunity share, 45% market share, other teams' yards, and getting close to 8 to 10 targets per game at this point. Monster week versus the Detroit Lions, even had a rushing touchdown, got injured a bit, ended up coming back in and then still finished it off quite nicely. So despite the tough matchup, the ball's going to go somewhere in this offense. I do expect the Bears to be trailing, so I do like DJ Moore here. Moving on to the C tier, we actually have quite a bit of studs here. Now, some of the reasons they're this low is either due to injuries at their quarterback position or just some other situational things. For Devontae Smith, nothing really against him. It's just at some point I can't have him, everybody in the B tier. So he's going to lead us off with the C tier, which he seems to do most weeks, but he's getting a 7.5 targets per game, 24% target share, and this is a good matchup versus, I already mentioned it with AJ Brown, so I'm not going to be redundant. Keenan Allen, a typical guy that we have in the S tier. I believe heading into last week, he was wide receiver 2 on the season, but unfortunately, Justin Herbert is out for the rest of the year. Injured his finger, I believe. I forget which finger it was, but either way, he is not playing. So we have Easton Stick at quarterback, which he did hit Keenan Allen right away, then he hit Quentin Johnson on a bomb. But this is a definite downgrade. The matchup versus the Raiders, not amazing. As a wide receiver, they're allowing the 10th fewest points per game in the position. The thing with Keenan, though, he was matchup proof. He had a good quarterback, and the offense flowed through him. He had 11 targets per game, which led the league, 31.5% target share, and over 8 catches per game. This is a big downgrade. You cannot expect these numbers going forward at this point. He's still going to be the focal point of the offense, I would imagine, because the offense has to flow through him, and I don't think Austin Eckler himself is going to get us there on his 3.5 yards per carry. So he's still playable. You're not benching Keenan Allen, but you definitely have to limit your expectations on him at this point. Same can be said for Justin Jefferson. Josh Dobbs threw him a hospital pass, ended up getting him injured, head in the back, left the game, but he's expected to return, which I just got the sleeper update like 2 minutes ago, so I was kind of hedging a little bit having him this low because I wasn't sure if he was going to play or not. Since he is playing, you might be able to put him on the back end of the B tier. Nick Mullins is going to be the quarterback this week, which is probably an upgrade over Josh Dobbs, but that's TBT at the moment. But we know the talent's there. He's the best wide receiver in the game. It's just, it's kind of hard because there's so many injuries at the quarterback position. Because there's other factors in play. It's not about Jefferson. It's about the quarterback play. Chris Olave, another guy that's dealing with poor quarterback play, but 9 targets per game. He is the air yards leader this year at 1,600, 15.5 ADOT. And it's a good matchup versus the Giants. They're currently 30th versus wide receivers, so there's no concern about that. And they're playing at home in the Dome. So I think Chris Olave definitely has a little bit of upside this week. Devontae Adams, another guy that's dealing with poor quarterback play. We also just got an alert that they do not have a confirmed quarterback yet for this weekend. So there's another wrench into that. It just sucks seeing all these elite level talented wide receivers without their quarterbacks. Like Keenan Allen, backup. Justin Jefferson, backup. Devontae Adams, backup. Chris Olave's got Derek Carr out there, which is basically a backup. So it just sucks to see. But unfortunately, it's what we're going to have to deal with. But Adams is still good enough to make do in this matchup. It's a good spot versus the Chargers at home here in Las Vegas. Rashee Rice, the number one wide receiver for Patrick Mahomes. I know he's not big in name value, but the targets have been there in recent weeks. He's definitely established himself as the wide receiver one, and we have to have another option outside of Travis Kelce. It looks like it's going to be Rashee Rice at this point. 24-point implied team total for the Chiefs here versus the New England Patriots, who are currently 19th versus the position. And moving on to our D tier, and yes, Courtland Sutton was in the C tier. He kind of slipped in there on accident. He's definitely in the D tier this week for me. But I do love the matchup versus the Detroit Lions. They're currently 23rd versus the position. And while Sutton is not in a high volume passing offense, he's receiving less than 6 targets per game. He has been scoring touchdowns at a high clip, and he also has a 42% market share of the team's air yards with a 13.6 ADOT, so the big play potential is certainly there. Amari Cooper, so under Joe Flacco, with him under center, they've been throwing the ball roughly around 40 some times per game, so the volume has been there for Amari Cooper. He's also getting over 7.5 targets per game this year. We know he's a very talented wide receiver in this matchup for Chicago, pretty much middle of the road. Don't really love it, don't really hate it either. I don't have high expectations, but Flacco has been slinging it, so the opportunity will certainly be there. Jaden Reed, rookie for the Green Bay Packers. Looks like Christian Watson's going to be out once again. If that is going to be the case, the matchup versus Tampa Bay, it is prime. They're allowing the 4th most points per game in the position, and the ball's got to go somewhere. I really like Jordan Love this week, so him, Romeo Doubs, I think are excellent options. Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens gets a great matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Their defense has been pretty non-existent so far this year. They're currently 26th versus the position. This is not another offense that passes the ball a ton, under 7 targets per game, but a 25% target share. The opportunity will be there. 23-point implied team total for the Ravens on the road. DeAndre Hopkins, really big performance, especially late versus the Miami Dolphins. It's not really a cakewalk matchup here versus the Houston Texans, his old team, but they're pretty much middle of the road. So as long as he's going to get 6+ targets with big play potential, which he has that 15.8 on the season, which of any wide receiver we have talked about so far, that is actually leading all of them. 20% target share and a 42% market share of the team's air yards. Nico Collins, if he is confirmed healthy and we have CJ Stroud confirmed playing, then he would be much higher in these rankings. But when you are ranking this early in the week, you have to account for injuries and whatnot. So if Nico Collins confirmed fine, because we left the last game early with an ankle injury, CJ Stroud also dealing with a concussion. But if both are in, both healthy, Nico Collins is honestly probably in the upper end of the B tier. So just keep that in mind that that's one of those positions here that can fluctuate highly. But I do like the spot versus Tennessee. They're currently 27th versus wide receivers. And with no Tank Dell, I mean, targets are just going to funnel to Nico Collins. Moving into the F tier, we really just have a bunch of stragglers. Terry McLaurin, they're going to throw the ball a ton, especially with them being dogs on the road, but you never really know where the ball is going. It's a decent matchup versus the Rams, though, so I don't mind it. Getting you 7.5 targets per game, but the floor is certainly a little bit low. Tyler Lockett, just like all the wide receivers here for Seattle, including JSN versus Philly, so all these guys are viable, even though JSN is not on here. Drake London, he's the number 1 target here in Atlanta. Monster week versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bit of a tougher matchup versus the Panthers. Having the fewest points, or 5th fewest points per game, I should say. And there's obviously not too much touchdown potential in this passing attack, but I don't think London's a will play. He should get you 4 to 5 catches on 6 to 8 targets. Fine, especially at this point. It's not like we're talking about B tier level guys. You're just hoping at this point, if you have to play anybody in the F tier, you're just hoping for a few points this week if you're in a really deep league. Romeo Doubs, assuming no Christian Watson, once again, great matchup versus Tampa Bay. We already talked about that with Jaden Reed at 7 targets last week. Calvin Ridley, he's a complete mess this year. You never know when to start him. I don't love this matchup versus Baltimore by any means. Both fewest points in the position, but he's very hit or miss. You need a boom week, and you have to pick between, say, Terry McLaurin and Calvin Ridley. I would say the ceiling's certainly way more higher on a guy like Calvin Ridley. Deontay Johnson, always a safe bet for targets no matter who the quarterback is. Although the matchup versus Indy, they've definitely gotten better versus the position. They're allowing the 11 fewest points per game at this point, but you can still, as a wide receiver 1 versus Indy, have successful games. Adam Thielen, 7 targets last week. He has definitely gone way down in value since the beginning of the season. He was one of the absolute best options in the league, and he is trended down quite heavily, which was honestly to be expected at his age and the Panthers offense. And then Odell, 10 targets last week, a pretty big game. We've actually seen him quite involved in this offense recently. And it's a very good matchup, so both him and Zay Flowers should have success versus Jacksonville's secondary. But with that being said, that's all I got for today's video, so I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. If you have any questions, leave them down below. More than happy to answer you. Wish you all the best of luck this week in week 1 of the Fantasy Football Playoffs, and I'll see you all next time.